The name Owen Treacy Sr. is notorious in the story of the sort of the rise of gangland in Limerick. And extraordinarily, his son has been before the courts in recent times and just gone to prison. We're going to come back to that. We're going to bring ourselves back to 2003 when Owen Treacy Sr. sort of survived against all odds in what became the trigger that started those Limerick drug wars.
Yeah, well, it was certainly the incident that kind of really put it on the kind of the front page in Ireland. It probably had been bubbling along since the mid-90s. Like there was all, there's been kind of, I suppose, revisions of when it actually started. There was one of the Colopys was attacked in the 90s, and the Fried started with the Ryans, and it continued on. And
the starting point can be a movable feast in them. I suppose for the public conscience, this one was just such a savage, deadly incident that was a calling card for the McCarthy Dundons, what they were to become, this extraordinary double cross, this incredible attempt at taking over everything and getting rid of all rivals. So anyway, there was stuff bubbling. The Dundon gang, the brothers, had returned from London and joined their cousins, the McCarthys, who were already at war with the Keane Colopy Ryan faction. Sorry, where are the Ryans in this? The Ryans are on, with the McCarthys.
The Ryans, yeah. Well, we didn't know that at that time.
No.
And that's the point. And so you had Owen Treacy and Kieran Keane Sr. They were basically brought to a meeting, or they went to a meeting with one of the Dundons. Yes. And they thought the Dundons were going to, had basically killed the two younger Ryans who had been kidnapped. And that they were going to view their bodies.
We need to rewind to the murder in the Moose Bar of the enforcer of Kieran Keane, a guy named Eddie Ryan.
Yeah, there was and they opened up with a gun there, and I think it was Owen Treacy was blamed as being part of that, so he was a target. So they thought that, so basically the Keanes thought they had the Ryans sorted out thanks to the Dundons, but in fact it was a double cross, and they were basically hooded and taken out in a van. And Kieran Keane was shot. Owen Treacy was stabbed multiple times. They thought he was dead. He did survive, and that's really kind of after the gun attack on the Moose Bar.
Kieran Keane, who had organised the shooting of Eddie Ryan Sr., feared that the sons were going to come for him to avenge their father's death. They were sort of people that he would have rather seen taken out. He believed the Dundons had kidnapped them and was going to basically hand them to him on a plate on a roadside to be shot dead. So any threat coming from them in retaliation for their father's death was going to be wiped out there and then. He went along to this roadside along with Owen Treacy Sr., and instead the Dundons basically killed him and left Owen Treacy Sr. for dead.
And they also made an attempt then to get Kieran and Philip Colopy to come to the scene. So they were trying to...
Where were the Colopys?
So the Colopys would have had their own feud going with the Ryans previous to that, which is arguably why that's where the whole thing started.
It's very confusing for people because what we do know, I suppose, from a basic level is there's two sides, but there's more than one family involved in each side, even though it's always been seen that this gang war in Limerick started because two families went to war. But there was two factions went to war made up of a number of different families who all probably were independent operators in the town. But when this gang war, they lined up on either side.
There was kind of an alignment, and certainly the Colopys would have been seen as a standalone organised criminal group, as well as the Keanes would have been seen as a separate one as well. But there would have been, like on all these gangs, whether it's Dublin or Limerick or wherever, there's always going to be people in between, people who work with both sides. But this kind of, it kind of changed it. And there was suddenly, you were one or the other. You're either aligned with the Dundon McCarthys or you're aligned with the Keane Colopys. And there was, being in between was likely to be just as dangerous as being in one faction or the other. It's probably twice as dangerous to be in between in case you're not trusted by both sides. So at least if you cut your odds by aligning yourself with one side, and this is all reflected in the prison system as well. And of course, we know, what was it? I think it's 19 lives, I think, are kind of attributed to the feud.
Exactly, and we're not going to go through that, but I suppose Owen Treacy Sr. is playing dead on the roadside when his killers leave the scene. The Gardaí and the rescue services, the ambulance services who find him, don't believe he's going to survive, but he does. And he goes on to give evidence in court against, amongst others, Desi Dundon, one of the Dundon brothers, who's still serving life imprisonment for that, for the murder of Kieran Keane. Now, he must have been horrifically badly injured, and you'd imagine an incident like that would turn you and anyone around you against crime for life. 17 stab wounds. Did he walk again? Did he recover properly, to your knowledge? Did you ever...
To be honest, I don't know. I haven't really heard anything other than, that he's fine, or that, I'm sure
in Limerick, and
I'm sure he has had some kind of medical issues ongoing, but there's certainly, it hasn't really come up on the radar with us.
And even that giving evidence in court, I mean, that is, in terms of the psyche around all this, that's a death sentence, isn't it? And yet he's still with us. And all these years later, his son, also called Owen Treacy Jnr, is now gone to prison for 3.5 years for drug dealing offences. He pleaded guilty at Limerick Circuit Court to that, and he obviously followed in his father's footsteps into a life of criminality. But interestingly, before he did go to prison, he sort of popped his head up as the owner of one of the most infamous sulky, are they called racehorses or
sulky ponies, sulky horses? Yeah, like he was a real enthusiast. Like he was a regular at meetings. Like they were doing videos where they turned up, say, outside of Mullingar, and he'd been after making the early morning trip up there to watch, whoever racing. Of course, he had a particular horse, Wild Pan Fire, which is considered one of the best.
Yeah.
Regularly posts, under 4 minutes in whatever it is, the 2-mile race or something like that.
Did they race with a cart behind them?
Yeah, a little two-wheeled sulky, a little two-wheel cart, I suppose. For it's a very lightweight frame, and the driver, the jockey, is sitting on that, and they usually, and you see the videos, they're absolutely chaotic, usually kind of on a public road, usually kind of a wide open road. And if they use motorways, at least there's nothing oncoming. But like in places like they've raced in, say, the Limerick Cork Road or the Limerick Tip Road and places like that where it's wide. And you see oncoming traffic having to pull in and stop because these guys are spread across the road. And there's kind of, but Owen Treacy would have been regularly, pictured, with one of his ponies, whatever, thumbs up, and he'd be posting on social media talking about races being organised in the UK and that sort of thing. And he was also he was breeding from his horse Wild Pan Fire. So, and at one point he was saying it was now $2,000 to have your mare covered by him. And somebody on one of the replies was saying, "Oh, there's at least 18 mares now in foal to Wild Pan Fire, and that they're all great horses as well." And so,
could you make a business out of that without having to get involved in the drug dealing, which will land you in?
Yeah, you probably could. I'm sure if you're getting, I'm sure you could. I mean, it's horse breeding.
Kind of racing industry, sulky, is it?
Well, it's legitimate. It's legitimate to breed horses. Like sulky, there is like harness racing is the term they'd use for the official version, and I think there is one track in Ireland. And they're
Laytown or something.
It's County Louth. I can't remember the name of it now. But but they're different to thoroughbred horses. They have a different the way and they're trained differently as well. But it's the biggest type of horse racing actually in France and in North America. Like the kind of the flat racing or the jumps racing that you see in Ireland and the UK would be considered in the minority in those countries. So it is actually it's a huge sport outside of Ireland. The only kind of people keeping it alive here are people who are doing it like illicitly. But there's been so many cases where we've seen people like Owen Treacy who have clear connections to gangland are involved in it. Mm-hmm. There was one cab case. A chap in Limerick had his basically he was a sulky horse trainer and had an entire track, all of which were seized by the Criminal Assets Bureau. Right. Like we've seen Nathan Biggie Little, foot soldier for the Kinahan cartel, is an enthusiast at one point as well. And I'm not saying everybody involved is, but it's
a lot of interest and a lot of kind of familiar faces pop up during
there is, yeah. And in the past, the likes of Troy Jordan would have been seen as a sulky racing enthusiast as well.
Happens as well on Facebook as opposed to legitimately, I suppose, outside of that. Do you know what the history of it is, the sulky racing and the parts? Was it a form of getting from A to B?
No, well, I suppose it would have been like, you would have had your pony and trap, and it was a way of moving around, like, instead of getting into your car and heading off to see your cousins or going to mass, you get on the pony and trap, and you'd have different versions of horse and cart. So obviously you're going to have the boy racers of the 18th century getting into their super lightweight traps and heading off then to race other young men or whatever, and full of drink and to have a bit of crack and gamble and stuff like that,
Yeah,
that's the way it would have been seen. And but I mean, I think what makes it attractive as a kind of, what would you say? It's like a golf club of the underworld to some extent, because you're meeting like-minded people. If you're involved in sulky racing, you have already demonstrated you're not frightened of the guards, you're not frightened of breaking the law, even at a minor, just at a minor level. You're out in the roads, you're taking a certain amount of risk, but you also have a certain amount of resources, because if you're racing one of these, you have a couple of grand somewhere. So you're more likely to be taken seriously, by some of these gangland figures. If you're a regular on it, people are going to trust you. They know you're not going to rat them out to the guards because you've been taking part in this illegal activity with them. Plus, as I said, you're showing a lack of fear. So, and of course, there's a bond as well you're forming with
the golf club that can do a bit of business.
Yeah, it's a way of, I'll introduce it.
Illegal sulky racing as opposed.
Yeah, this is the road racing. Yeah, this is the stuff that goes on where it's it is fairly clandestine.
Yeah,
and the messages go out. I mean, we've seen them at midnight. Outside City West on the N7. We see them on the N3, like out near Clonee. There's different roads. There's one in Kildare that's regularly used outside of Kilcullen. There's the road near Croom in County Limerick is a regular. There's a few of them that are kind of they're perfectly straight spots, and there's a mile post marked out, so they know exactly how far they're going. And it's usually
win the surprise money.
There'd be money staked, and you can't really trust what people are saying. There'd be some people kind of boasting, but there's definitely cash, and the odd time you get to see, a roll of money being handed over. But there's anything, depends who you talk to. But some people say, oh, no, it's only a couple of £100, it's only for sport. And then others are saying, no, there was 20 grand, 30 grand put on this, because they were trying to encourage some. They're trying to make a name for their horse by beating, say, somebody like Wild Pan Fire, which is considered the best horse. So you are going to get stud fees then, as you do in legitimate horse racing. If your horse wins the Irish Derby, and as a stallion that's fully intact, you're going to make a fortune in stud fees thereafter. You probably retired a horse straight away.
He was looking to sell it, or he was certainly had some sort of a situation up on the Facebook before he went into prison. Do you know, did it sell? I mean, that sort of thing doesn't obviously happen publicly or on social.
Yeah, well, yeah, he put up a post there just saying, look, he was getting out of the game. He didn't say why, anything like that. He just said he was finished and he was looking to sell the horse, and he wanted serious offers. And since then, Owen Treacy's social media has disappeared, it's shut down, whatever. But Wild Pan Fire has his own page now, and it looks like he's been raced in Dublin, and that someone in Dublin has obviously taken him over, whether it's been sold or bought or taken in trust. And there was a few. I got a message from someone who was concerned for safety because he had a nasty looking cut on one of his legs, but was raced anyway. And of course, did his usual show and put in a good time, so everyone was happy.
Right. And what sort of money would Wild Pan Fire other than be worth? Do you know?
Well, there's some of these horses, like in the past, I've heard stories of up to 100,000 that, if Wild Pan Fire was sold, people are going to say, oh, he went definitely for 100,000, but they wouldn't necessarily know. But you comfortably get 20,000. I mean, on the open market, as just an ordinary horse, for somebody who's going to buy it for a bit of show jumping or just, tipping around the fields, they're not worth very much. They're not really worth a whole lot.
I'm sure some of those fighting dogs are probably worth money as well. Again, another very underground sport. It all feels very Peaky Blinders.
Yeah, it does. But I suppose in Ireland, though, you can underestimate it. But Ireland has a huge horse tradition, and you kind of have to balance, okay, with animal welfare, people are just as opposed to the legitimate horse racing. I mean, like if you go to Aintree, I think, I don't know, was it 3 horses died in Aintree this year? Beeches Brook was this famous, infamous jump, you know, and the people who do the kind of illegal road racing, you say, oh, look, those poor horses, they're only, you know, they're a year old and they're being made to run on tarmac, and the immediate comeback as well, what about happened in Aintree this year, or what happened at Punchestown or wherever? There's, you know, there's a jumps race. There's often in a 3 or 4 day festival, you'll probably have at least one horse will die. They'll break a leg or break a neck. You know, they fall, and some of them are I suppose some of the thoroughbreds, they're fragile. Like, you know, they're not hardy ponies as such. You know. But like, I mean, like I did speak to a vet about the ones being raced on the roads, and he says, well, the fact that it's unregulated, you know, some of them, they are only 1-year-olds, so they're, you know, they're on hard ground, so the bones aren't formed. And he says, plus these guys are also using supplements that you wouldn't get away with in the legitimate horse racing. Now, there's arguments about, you know, cheating in Irish racing anyway, and I suppose there always will be. People are always going to try and find a way, and just as there is in professional sports, some people are going to try and sort of dope their way to victory. But like in I suppose the street stuff, the illegal stuff, they have found things like, you know, like blood thinners that, you know, or blood thickeners, I think it is, so that the horse can take in more oxygen and race for longer and all this kind of stuff. And that has a huge effect on an animal's health. But like, I suppose the sentimentality that some people afford to horses, I don't think it would apply in a lot of these horse owner cases. And that goes across kind of, I think, the legitimate stuff as well. A lot of, you know, if a horse doesn't make it, you know, has a couple of runs in you know, various race courses, off he goes. And it's, you know, it's to the abattoir, you know, it's where they go. I mean, they're too costly. Yeah. So unless you can afford to keep a pet thoroughbred.
Now, Owen Treacy Jnr, owner of said horse, and clearly fairly famous within the world of sulky racing, is 28, and he's from St. Itas Street in St. Mary's Park, and the prison sentence was for the possession of €5,000 worth of drugs, which he had stored in a vacant house. Feels quite small fry stuff. The drug deals were stored in Kinder chocolate plastic eggshells and under roof tiles at the derelict property. But his sister has also followed that route, and she was previously jailed for 2 years for the same offence. Was that similar?
Yeah, it was the same. Yeah, they actually put surveillance on them, and they were kind of watching this ongoing. So when they moved in, then that's the charges relate to what was seized on the particular thing. But obviously there was surveillance going on, so they were watching the pattern and how it was going. So yeah, I mean, it's relatively basic street dealing, but it's obviously quite lucrative as well.
And he has, I think the court has heard, no legitimate source of income. So it's probably not a great idea to be putting up on social media that you're the owner of a very expensive horse that's earning 2,000 in stud fees.
Yeah, again, I mean, why not use that as a possible way to, I suppose,
go legit.
Yes, go legit. You have like, yeah. If you're making $2,000 every time your mare is covered, every time you win a race, 5 or 6 people might turn up. So that's a tidy sum of money.
Absolutely. Okay, Eamon, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.